Okay, I think we are recording now.
Okay.
Let's start started. I'm gonna pretend as though, we have other people in the audience, but hi, my name is Kira. I am the Substance Use Prevention Coordinator for the City of Somerville. I'm with the Prevention Services Office, and my role within the City of Somerville is to help provide community education and prevention awareness, and also to do a lot of work with our partner agencies around prevention projects for substance use in Somerville. I also do some work with the Somerville Public Schools in terms of providing direct support to youth who are struggling with substances, mostly in the middle school and the high school levels. And welcome to the first of our summer virtual training series. We decided that, honestly, it was probably about 7 months ago, we had decided we were going to offer a series of trainings to the community, and we had actually created a bunch of them right before the shutdown. And, now that we're all kind of a little bit more settled in terms of working from home and also just noticing what the needs in the community have been recently, we decided that we would just go ahead and do a virtual series. And this is going to be the first of that. We're going to be discussing vaping and e-cigarettes tonight. And if you have any questions, I strongly recommend that you type them into the chat box. We will get to them at the end of the presentation, and we will go from there. So, why is my PowerPoint not working? Here we go. Okay. So a couple of the objectives that we have for tonight, just going over kind of the basic about what is vaping, a short history of what vaping has looked like in our country, why is vaping on the rise, the impacts of vaping on health. We're also going to be getting some updates from Bonnie, who is the Six City Tobacco Initiative Director, who is my coworker. Oh, 1 second. I think we have a, oh, okay. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Hang on 1 second. I need to probably clip this a little bit more efficiently to near my mouth. The pen seems to be a good way of doing that. Thank you for letting me know about that. I think I need a new microphone after this. Okay. Just give me a thumbs up. Does this work? We're good?
Yes.
Can you hear me clearly? Okay, perfect. All right, let me just minimize the Zoom chat then again. Okay. And then after we hear from Bonnie, I will also be going over a couple of different resources that are also all accessible from the comfort and safety of your own home right now, for both adults and for youth. And we'll go from there. So there are a bunch of different types of vapes that are currently available on the market right now. What we have down here in terms of this image right at the bottom of our screen is an example of some of the more typical ones. I have some photos of some other not so typical examples of vaping devices later on in the presentation, but we'll get to that momentarily. The ones that I think a lot of people are super familiar with from the beginning of when vaping started to become very popular were these devices right here that I'm kind of hovering over with my mouse. These are almost kind of looking like pens. You also have kind of thicker, heavier devices, which are referred to as tanks. A lot of what people, I think, recognize vaping devices as now, though, are the ones that I'm circling right here with my mouse. And I think these are pretty synonymous with Juul devices at this point for many people in the community. But we also have new vaping devices that are hitting the market on a pretty regular basis, including these, which are about the size of the palm of my hand, and a little bit heavier and a lot more noticeable than, say, a Juul device. And finally, we also now have disposable e-cigarettes as well, which is an issue that we will talk about a little bit further on in the presentation when we start talking about some youth prevention work that we've been doing in the city of Somerville. There are two different types of vapes that we probably want to be concerning ourselves with. There are the traditional e-cigarettes, the examples of which are down here in this image, which we just talked about. There is an internal heating engine that heats up the fluid from the vaping pod and releases and produces an aerosol vapor. And this vapor, contrary to popular belief, unlike traditional cigarettes, does it produce tar in your lungs? No, but it does still contain levels of nicotine, other chemicals, and usually for a lot of people, different types of flavorings. I think the last statistic I heard about, there are probably at this point several thousand different types of flavors that were available pretty commonly on the market. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head, but it was definitely well over 5,000. And those are different flavors being produced by a multitude of different companies all across not just the US, but also globally, because vaping is obviously a global substance use form as well as within the US. Another thing that we also are going to be talking a lot about later is e-cigarettes that have been modified for the smoking of CBD and or THC, which for those of you who might not be super familiar with what those chemicals are, those are both components found within marijuana. THC is the chemical that is actually going to make you feel that high sensation. CBD is not going to create that, but it is still something that is going to enter directly into your bloodstream and therefore go straight on to your brain within seconds of being, consumed within the body. And it definitely has some pretty noticeable physical reactions as well. The issues that we have with CBD and THC modified e-cigarettes is that this is not what a vaping device is really supposed to be used for. These are all modified and nothing that is super, super legal or finalized on the market. But there are a lot of reasons why we have seen this develop. CBD and THC, if you've ever encountered anyone smoking marijuana around you before, perhaps, or even just going past someone on the street who may be smoking, you'll notice it instantly, just that really heavy aroma that hits the air as soon as someone is smoking some form of marijuana. When you are smoking CBD or THC in a vaping pen, there is a much less noticeable odor, and it's a lot actually more fast acting. It enters the bloodstream a lot quicker than if you were to be smoking it in a traditional blunt or joint. And because of both of those reasons, and I think especially because of the fact that it is so much more discreet, it's definitely a part of the vaping market that is growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger every single year, especially with our youth, which is again something that we will be talking about later on. I do have this great video here from UCLA Health, which kind of goes a little bit more in depth into the vaping process. I don't know if anyone is particularly interested. We can skip this tonight if we want to, but it is a really great animated video. Show of hands, anyone interested?
Yeah.
How long is it, Kara?
It's about 4 minutes, which is why I'm saying, like, if we need to skip it, we've already gone over a lot of what's in here.
I'd like to see it.
Okay, sure. 1 second. Let me see if I can get my computer to cooperate here. Okay. So, all right. Like I said, this is from UCLA. That's a great video.
Kara, there's no sound. Do you know that? Or at least I'm not hearing any sound.
There's no sound?
No.
Interesting, because my volume is definitely up.
Oh, maybe that's me. No, it's not. There isn't any sound.
Okay, yeah. I'm gonna start this over. Can you hear anything? Can you hear anything yet?
Nope, not yet.
Huh. Okay, that's curious. Technical difficulties, it seems like. I'm not sure why that's not.
Did you check the volume thing on the bottom next to the play and pause button?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not on mute. It's on full sound. Huh.
Here. And that's not.
Curious. I don't know why that's not working. I will have to try and figure that out. And yes, Matt, I was trying to send the full volume up on my computer, and even when I was doing that, it doesn't sound as though like anyone was still able to hear it, which is a little bit weird. I will be sending the PowerPoint out, so I definitely recommend if people want to go ahead and watch this separately. It really is a great video. Like I said, we've already talked about quite a bit of this, but we can definitely come back to it at some point. Okay, so unfortunate. I have to try and figure that. Apologies. Okay. So just out of curiosity, I don't know if anyone has looked too much into the actual history of vaping and e-cigarettes, but would anyone in here be surprised if I told you that the first e-cigarette patent was actually submitted in 1927? So it was submitted by Joseph Robinson of New York City, And it was approved 3 years later by the US Patent Office, but it was never actually commercialized. It never hit the market. And we have here a quote from Mr. Robinson saying, "My invention relates to vaporizing devices for holding medicinal compounds, which are electrically or otherwise heated to produce vapors for inhalation, and which is so sanitary and very effective and so simple that anyone can use it." From what I can recall of Mr. Robinson, he actually patented this device as an aid for not only medicinal purposes, but also as a way of preventing some of the issues that people were starting to notice with smoking traditional tobacco products. And then if we go forward another 40 years or so, Mr. Henry Gilbert of Pennsylvania in 1963 files a patent for another type of e-cigarette, which is called smokeless. But again, like with the first one from 1927, it never actually hit the market. One of the interesting things that we start to see with this second e-cigarette form is actually a much more heavy commercialization push for preventing disease and death from tobacco use, and also as a weight loss tool. Dieters, he said, could, and I quote, "smoke their favorite food." And among some of the 10 flavors that he created were mint, rum, and cinnamon, which are definitely flavors that actually we still see today and we still use today. So I guess, you know, certain things about flavors have just not changed even over the course of decades. But in terms of what we now know as the modern e-cigarette, this was created by a gentleman named Hon Leek in China back in 2003. It was marketed, just like the other two, as a safe nicotine cessation tool. It hit the market in Europe and the United States in 2006, 3 years after its initial creation. And since then, we have seen like I said earlier, a massive global expansion of vaping devices across the entire world, and definitely throughout Europe, Asia, the United States, and other parts of the globe. Interestingly, I think contrary to its original creation and the purpose behind that creation, we see here kind of at the bottom of this chart here, several different reasons for why people began to shift more towards vaping away from traditional cigarette products. So we have here low cost, flavor choices, safety of use, you can vape indoors, a favorable odor, quitting combustibles, and social image. The thing that always strikes me as being kind of the most fascinating part of this particular research study is these two bars right here, which is quitting combustibles and social image. So they compared data from marketing research from 2012 and 2015. The blue you have 2012, the white you have 2015. Back in 2012, a significant larger number of people were interested in turning to vaping as an actual smoking cessation tool. And that number, or I should say that percentage of interest, has actually dropped pretty dramatically. I would say by easily about 13, 14%. Whereas if you go over here to social image, and I don't think I remember off the top of my head what the market age range for this research study was, but I'm pretty sure it was for adults, you see this huge jump from about 21%, maybe 22% of people smoking because of social image to almost about 37, 38%, I would say. So definitely the way that we look at vaping, the way that we treat vaping in this country it's undergone a huge shift and probably will continue to undergo some pretty big shifts. Some other things that are also interesting to note about different trends that have popped up is we can see here that vaping indoors is definitely something that has also decreased. I think that probably has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of places are now treating vaping indoors the same way that they would treat you smoking a traditional cigarette indoors. You can't smoke a vaping device on an airplane, for instance. You can't smoke a vaping device within a school or within a hospital or just even, you know, in a supermarket. You know, there's definitely been a lot of transition, especially as I think people have started to realize that vaping is not necessarily consequence-free. However, just like I was also saying earlier, favorable odor, you can see there's also been a bit of a percentage shift there in the upwards trend. And again, I think that's definitely something that a lot of people are very conscious about now, especially when there is such a lot of stigma around traditional smoking and the odor especially that it tends to create around people. Now here, I mentioned earlier that there are many other different types of vaping devices that are actually on the market. You see here actually on where I'm circling right now, this hoodie actually has a concealed vaping device hidden within the strings of the hoodie. You also see here what kind of almost looks like a regular Apple Watch and a battery, I believe that is down there. I have seen vaping devices hidden within many different types of clothing and many different sort of household looking objects, including, as we see here, even asthma inhalers or pen devices, like literal pens with actual ink inside of them. So again, there's been a huge shift onto the side of discretion when it comes to smoking and vaping. Among teens especially, you know, an age group that we are always trying to keep an eye on, vaping use is definitely on the rise. There's been a lot of vaping commercials and promotion within social media and also with peer pressure. There's also obviously the allurement of just having so many different flavors on the market, and also a still existing belief that e-cigarettes are not as harmful as traditional nicotine, even though that is not something that's super correct. In terms of teens and adults, we think that there might be some correlation between vaping and mental health, but this is still something that we are doing a lot of research into, especially because vaping has only really been, you know, popular in the market, I'd say for, you know, Bonnie, you can correct me here, I'd say the past 3 to 5 years, we've been starting to notice that trend going up. But definitely there could be some correlation there as well. We just kind of have to get a little bit more research done.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? Are you saying there's a correlation between it in terms of negative outcomes? Are you seeing, I guess, what exactly is being researched?
I think a lot of what is being researched at the moment is people using vaping devices in a very similar way to other substances, is in terms of like self-medicating and using it as a coping skill. I can't speak for every single person who I've ever spoken to, but I know I've done, again, a lot of work with youth over at the high school and at the middle school. And a lot of what I am noticing with these youth and these students is a lot of anxiety, a lot of depression, and these youth turning towards what they think is actually a safe product that's going to immediately have a positive impact on their mood. And again, not every single person is going to vape for that reason. And not every single person is going to have mental health and then choose to vape. There's a lot of gray area there, but I have noticed that as a definite correlation with a lot of the youth that I've done some work with. And we'll also be touching on that a little bit later on as well, because we actually have some data from the YRBS that I'd like to share with you all as well. Now, vaping in 2020, obviously, in 2019, starting in about March of last year, we definitely started to notice a huge public health crisis around vaping in the US. And it happened very rapidly. And since March up until I'd say about late December of 2019, you had almost 2,500 people in the US being hospitalized due to some sort of vaping related illness, which we also refer to as EVALI. We have 52 deaths that were confirmed in 26 states and also the District of Columbia. In terms of the people who passed away due to EVALI, the average age was actually around 52. So we were noticing a lot of people who were more in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who were actually passing away because of EVALI. However, you did see a full spectrum of ages of people being impacted. Starting all the way from 17, there was a 17-year-old in Texas who unfortunately passed away due to this back in, I think, December. And you've had people as old as 75 who've also been connected with EVALI causing death. And we still have more deaths that are under investigation. We probably still don't have the full idea of how many people have been impacted by this medically or how many people have passed away from this, maybe just because they weren't, you know, as connected to, say, their medical providers as they could have been. And their passing happened kind of on the relatively quiet side or happened pretty suddenly. But I will say also that there's the investigations that probably would have been more publicly acknowledged during this whole situation has definitely taken a backseat in the face of everything that has been going on with COVID. As someone who is doing a lot of research, I definitely can tell you that up until about December, January, vaping articles were coming out in scientific and medical journals on a very, very frequent basis. And ever since the start of the pandemic and the shutdown, obviously we have had to completely shift focuses. I hope that we will continue, though, to see more research still being done around vaping and vaping related illnesses into the future, especially because, ironically, you have, and I'm actually going to get into this in just a moment on this next slide, you just have a lot of the same symptoms between EVALI and COVID, ironically, in some ways. Everything from gastrointestinal discomfort to lung scarring to lung inflammation. I could go on and on and on. And again, I'll get to the details in, I think, the next slide or two about that. But there are definitely a lot of comparisons there that we need to be worried about. It's just some other interesting demographic information that's to note. We have noticed that a lot of people, over 50%, 67% of hospitalized patients with EVALI were male, and 78% of them were actually under the age of 35. So this is definitely, these are illnesses that are definitely targeting a younger generation, with a median age of about 24. However, again, the age range goes all the way from 13 up to 77. And this is, again, in terms of hospitalized patients, not patients who have actually died due to EVALI. In terms of age group category, you see a huge chunk of them, 38%, being between the age of 18 to 24, which is definitely an age at which, you know, a lot of substance use exposure may be starting to take part in one's life. So that is definitely an age group that we need to be continuing to be worrying about. But you also have a lot of people who, again, are 25, 35, 45, 50 and up, who we also still need to be really reaching out to in terms of just the impact of this. And then we also need to think about other things like, again, gender, people with other health disparity issues, and also just making sure that all of that public health knowledge is still not getting lost in everything that is going on with COVID in the world right now. Another interesting thing that I wanted to mention is not just the fact that we are seeing a lot of people being hospitalized due to EVALI and other vaping related illnesses, we're also noticing a lot of crossover with other substances. If you see here, we looked at a research study from back in, again, December 2019, where they looked at 1,700 or so hospitalized patients, and 80% of them reported using, whether on a regular basis or they had at least tried it, THC products with their vaping device. And 35% of those 80% reported pretty much only using vaping devices to smoke THC. You also have a lot of people who are still smoking nicotine-related vaping pods. You also have a lot of people who are using CBD. But I think the general takeaway I would point out here is, again, the fact that THC, that market has just swung up immensely, and it is going to be extremely worrisome, I think, moving into the future still, just because these are all things that are, for the most part, being sold as black market items, as illicit items. And when you're buying something that is from the black market, you're buying it off the street, meaning that you have no idea what you're really getting in your product. There's no guarantee of any kind of ingredient purity or any kind of safety measures even. So that is definitely something that we are going to have to continue to really keep a focus on, especially with people who, you know, whether they are someone who has been using marijuana type products for a considerable amount of time, or whether you have a young person who is kind of just experimenting with different substances. We just don't know the strengths of these different products, and that in turn could have a major impact in terms of how severe the illness gets and how long the treatment and recovery period after that process has to look like. So we're going to have to keep looking into that for sure. Some more specific details about vaping illnesses, like I had mentioned earlier, which again, we see a lot of similarities between this and a lot of what I've been seeing with COVID patients. EVALI is basically upper respiratory illness symptoms that are linked to vaping that can't otherwise be connected to any other sort of upper respiratory issue, like cold, influenza, bronchitis, pneumonia, anything like that. Some symptoms include shortness of breath, coughing, chest pain, nausea, vomiting, stomach pains, diarrhea, fever, chills, and also noticeable weight loss. There's also another condition that we call bronchiolitis obliterans, which is known more commonly on the street as popcorn lung. This is a lot of the symptoms that I had just talked about, but also a distinct focus on the shortness of breath and also coughing because the lung airways have actually been scarred. We think that popcorn lung is caused due to inhaling two different chemicals, diacetyl and acetaldehyde. Diacetyl is also known as microwavable popcorn flavoring, and acetaldehyde is a chemical that is found in marijuana smoke. So again, we see that connection to the smoking of THC and CBD products. But also just, microwave, I know that popcorn flavoring is definitely a vaping flavor that I have seen being sold on the market and being pretty heavily promoted in terms of, different flavors that might appeal to different folks. So that combination of, again, the flavors plus marijuana is something that, again, we just can't ignore at this point. There are some other things here on the side, which I think would also be super important to mention. We talked a lot about lungs. We also want to point out that when you are smoking even a traditional cigarette, or if you're smoking an e-cigarette, it can increase your heart rate, and that in turn can impact everything from oxygen levels in your body to blood pressure. So definitely we're really concerned about people who have heart conditions that are maybe even just like pre-existing heart conditions. We are also worried about the impact of nicotine on the brain. Nicotine, again, whether smoked traditionally or via vape, it definitely acts as a bit of a stimulant, and that can result in a bunch of other issues as well, some short-term, others long-term. Again, one of the things that I also like to point out to people is, when you are smoking, and especially with our young people, the human brain doesn't stop developing until about 25 for women, 26 for men. So any sort of stimulant or depressant, or really any type of substance that you're putting into your body that's going directly into your bloodstream and your brain can have a major impact on a lot of different aspects of things, ranging from mood and emotional control to memory and motivation, focus, decision-making. So this is why we also have the behavior section right over here on this part of the slide. And nicotine is maybe not going to cause the same sort of behavioral changes, say alcohol might, or cocaine, or opioids, but it definitely can cause some pretty important behavioral changes to the individual. So what exactly is behind vaping illness? This is something that, again, we are still trying to get a better understanding of. One of the things that we have seen, though, is the presence of something called vitamin E acetate. This has been found in multiple samples of different vape products, which are black market, again, mostly black market THC related items. And this is something that is basically used to dilute THC oil in vape cartridges in order to stretch out the product. The more you can stretch out your actual supply of THC, the more pods you can actually sell on the market, even if they're not going to be sold at full strength per se. Vitamin E acetate normally is actually pretty safe. It's used in a lot of skincare and cosmetic items. So it's very safe topically on the skin, and you can also actually eat it as a vitamin supplement. However, inhaling it may actually have significant interference with your ability to breathe and your lung functioning overall. So definitely, again, there's a lot of thoughts that THC and vitamin E acetate are kind of really spearheading a lot of the issues that we are seeing with vaping illnesses. But again, we still need to do some research. There could be other factors at play here, and we just want to be absolutely sure about what's going on, especially because even though vitamin E acetate doesn't create tar in the way traditional tobacco would, it does actually harden in the lungs, which we think is one of the reasons why EVALI people, people with patients have such, a marked symptom reporting of having that difficulty breathing. So, and this comes down to another really important question here, which is vaping actually safe for nicotine cessation? That's why it's been marketed to all these different people for decades now. And the answer is it's still actually really unclear as to whether vaping is safer than smoking traditional nicotine products. There is no long-term research to suggest that vaping is 100% effective when it comes to being a nicotine cessation tool. And vaping products do contain nicotine and other inhalant chemicals, which can negatively impact your lung functioning. So there's still a lot of clarity that we need to seek around this issue. And basically, overall, I am not a medical professional here, but I would say that in terms of who should be avoiding vaping, absolutely, definitely youth under the age of 21, preferably maybe even 25, 26, again, because of brain development, pregnant mothers, and individuals especially who have that history of maybe lung diseases or upper respiratory issues, and also people who have cardiovascular heart issues. Now, Massachusetts, I would like to say, we have really taken a lot of steps around vaping products and also flavored products in particular. And I'm sure Bonnie will have a lot of things to say about this in a few moments, but back in December of 2010, Somerville Board of Health actually passed some of the first regulations that exist out there that restricted the sale of e-cigarettes to adult-only 21+ retail tobacco stores. And that also applied to different flavors, especially menthol, wintergreen, and mint tobacco. And then about a year later, November 2019, which is actually not all that long ago, Governor Baker signs into law a new bill prohibiting the sale of all flavored tobacco products, including menthol and mint, in Massachusetts. This did go into effect on June 1st. Obviously, June 1st, we were still, and we still are pretty much in the middle of the shutdown and the pandemic at the moment, but that law still went into effect. This law also put a 75% excise tax on e-cigarette sales, required all health insurance companies to cover tobacco cessation counseling and nicotine replacement therapy, and it also restricted nicotine products with higher levels of nicotine to only 21+ retail tobacco stores. So at this point, let's also focus to some of how this is going to affect those of us, both in Somerville and out of Somerville. Obviously, this is a 21+ product only, very similar to alcohol. You cannot sell vaping devices or vaping products to minors. That is very illegal. And products with higher levels of nicotine, which in this case is about anything over 35 milligrams, must be sold in those adult-only 21+ retail stores. Flavored vaping products and flavored tobacco products, including menthol and mint, can no longer be sold in Massachusetts at all. Only tobacco-flavored vape products can be sold in stores open to all ages, which was a bit of a surprise for me, I realized, when actually Matt, my manager, informed me that, even the tobacco flavorings in these vape products were being marketed as like Virginia tobacco, for instance, without even that bit of flavoring in it. You're getting something that pretty much essentially nobody wants to smoke because it tastes terrible. THC-based vape products are only available now in adult use or medical marijuana establishments, and these are very regulated by the Cannabis Control Commission here in Mass. In Somerville, we've taken it a step further. Nicotine-based e-cigarettes cannot be purchased in any store, period, and this also does include those tobacco-flavored vape products that I had mentioned earlier. Now, I had mentioned earlier that we really want to do a lot of focus when it comes to our youth and protecting our youth. I am happy to report that according to the most recent YRBS survey that we completed up at the high school, which would have been 2017 to 2018, 73% of Somerville High School students have never tried vaping at all, and 87% reported no current use of vaping. And at the middle school level, it gets even better. 94% of students have never tried vaping. This is from 2016 to 2017, and only 1% of those students reported current use. Now, we have seen a bit of an uptick in numbers, I assume, because these reports are 2 or 3 years old at this point. But I'm also proud to report that our numbers still remain very low when compared to other municipalities in the area and just across the state, period. And that's not just true of vaping, that's just true of substances across the board, period. So we should be very proud of ourselves that our youth are being pretty smart about this. Again, however, we are starting to see some increase with middle school and with high school students. I personally have noticed that, with age, there definitely becomes an increased chance that a student will have tried at least vaping at some point or another. You see the numbers go from 6th grade up to 7th grade, up to 8th grade, in that kind of upward curve. And then again, from 9th grade all the way up to senior year, seniors were the most common reporters of having tried vaping at that point, which again, at that point kind of makes sense because you're older at that point and you're being exposed to a lot more peer pressure and a lot more social media presence. And also just maybe even frankly, like we mentioned earlier, maybe even just an increased level of stress. So definitely something that we need to keep an eye on. Oh, Bonnie, sorry, what was that?
Sorry?
Did you say something?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I did, but I thought I was on mute. I apologize.
Oh no, are you talking to your puppy? Okay. All right.
I was.
Okay, gotcha. So moving on. However, again, like I was mentioning earlier, our youth are continuing to always impress and amaze me with just how proactive and how focused they are on prevention. We have a lot of our students who are active with Somerville Cares About Prevention, which is led by their director, lovely Batari Heller, who unfortunately could not be with us today. They are doing a lot, especially on social media within the past, I would say, year or so, to just increase awareness around the dangers associated with vaping and even smoking traditional cigarettes. These are some of the recent social media posts that they've been putting out in the last month or so. And they are also continuing to do things like going to the State House and speaking in front of legislators and lawmakers. They're going actively to conventions and conferences. I actually went with them to one back in October in the fall, and they spoke out with, I'd say, at least 6 or 7 other schools from all across the state. So we're also doing a lot of work with the Massachusetts Tobacco Cessation Program and other organizations as well. And this is just something that is continuing to evolve. And now we have some updates from Bonnie Carroll, who, like I mentioned earlier, is the Six City Tobacco Initiative Director. She just wants to provide a couple of different updates on some of the things that have been happening since December. And I'll let her kind of take it away. Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kira. I just wanted to point out the latest thing that's going on in the field of vaping. So as you mentioned, we put in very strict laws around the sale of flavored vape products, and made them much less accessible to young people and people in general because of the dangers, because the flavor is so enticing that it contributes to addiction, and it contributes to people really enjoying that. So unfortunately, as is usually the case, and I like to talk about this whenever I do informational sessions for people, is to remind them of the tactics of big tobacco companies. And unfortunately, every time, or maybe not every time, but many times when we pass laws to restrict certain products, the next thing you know, they're showing up in a new and revised form. And that's the case right now. So the big thing among young people, I don't know statistics for Somerville, but interestingly, when I was telling my granddaughter a little bit about a product called Puff Bars, she got very interested in it and did a little research project for me and gave me some of the information. And according to her, Puff Bars are very talked about on TikTok and Snapchat and places where young people frequent. So what a puff bar is it's a contraption that will fit on a vape product. It's a disposable, and it will actually make the vape product flavored. So, even though they can't buy flavored liquid anymore, and they actually, the puff bars are illegal as well. But it just goes to show, how one thing will be taken away and suddenly there's a way around that. So I'm concerned about that. At one point, Matt and I visited a store in Somerville that is not licensed to sell tobacco anyway. But we went to take a look at their products. It's a CBD store, which is completely legal. And they're selling legal products, but we did find disposable puff bars there. And of course, immediately we asked them to, dispose of them. They're not allowed to sell them. But it was just, indicative of this next wave that we might see, which is especially young people getting hands on these puff bars. So that's the most updated info that I have. The other thing about the puff bars is that they provide even more nicotine. So that's one of the things, because nicotine is the addictive product in these vapes. A lot of people have been misled to believe that tobacco contains nicotine, but vape liquid does not, and that's far from the truth. And just to add to a couple of things that you said, or at least one thing that you said, you mentioned the nicotine level in some of these products, and in the governor's law now, a convenience store cannot sell a vape product that has more than 35
milligrams.
Milligrams per milliliter. Yes. So, you know, in order to try to help ensure that people are getting a lower level of nicotine, at least, because in the kind of heyday of Juuls, before a lot of regulations came down, young people were smoking, you know, a whole pod, which was equivalent to a pack of cigarettes, in less than a day. And the nicotine level was high. So according to my granddaughter's research, which I can get to you, these puff bars contain even more of a nicotine level. So that's really worrisome. So we're on the lookout for that. As you mentioned, we're kind of still under COVID, and I haven't been visiting stores yet to see, you know, how they've fared after the law went into effect on June 1st. But certainly when I begin to go back out and inspect, that's one of the important things that I'll be looking for, is to make sure that they don't have any puff bars.
And that actually makes me also remember something that I kind of touched upon a little bit earlier, but I think I want to mention definitely, especially now that puff bars are becoming kind of maybe the next big thing with the youth, is anything that is disposable is definitely going to be something that is, I think, going to be heavily marketed towards a lot of our youth, just because you can just throw it away as soon as you're done. You don't have to hold on to it. You know, it's not like, let's say, a traditional Juul device where you had to have the Juul, plus then you had to also have to buy the flavor pods to attach to it. Now you can just like use it once and then just get rid of it. I remember up at the high school, especially before the shutdown, we were having a lot of issues with people bringing in disposable vaping devices into the school and just trying to flush it all down the toilet. You know, they would be vaping in the bathrooms and just trying to get rid of it that way. And that was causing a lot of problems. So definitely anything that is disposable is, again, something that we just need to really keep an eye on, especially when it comes to youth prevention at the schools. And obviously, like, we are doing our best to create new regulations around marketing as soon as we see changes in the market happening like that. I don't know if Bonnie, you want to comment on that at all, but, you know, we're trying to do our best to, again, keep up with different marketing strategies that big tobacco companies are putting out there.
Sure. Yes, we are. And, you know, as I said, these are already regulated, even though some people are trying to get around it by saying that they don't meet the criteria for the things that we've regulated, but they do. And just reminding me of something, Kara, that people might find interesting, because I certainly thought this was a terrific idea. So many stores will have advertisements in their stores, even for products that they can no longer sell. So for example, I don't know, maybe they get tired and, you know, are not paying attention to the advertisements in their store, or to their distributors, you know, give them these advertisements and maybe give them an incentive to have those advertisements visible. I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but under this new law, people can no longer advertise what they can't sell. So that's a really big boom. Not only is it because it takes it out of the public view and our young people are not seeing it, but also just for aesthetic purposes. You know, you see some stores that are just loaded with all kinds of signs and So this is going to take care of a lot of that. In fact, I was driving around today in Somerville, and I noticed that some of the stores who in the past have been pretty loaded with advertisements in their window have really pared it down. So that's a great thing, good thing.
Absolutely. The more we can do to prevent access and exposure, the better.
Yes.
Can I just comment on that really quickly?
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of that last piece of information that Bonnie just shared about the advertising. And I think it's super interesting. So Bonnie and I have had a lot of conversations over the years. So I was a smoker in my teens into I was like my 30s, and smoked only menthol cigarettes, which have a targeted audience.
Yeah.
But very interesting because, my office is on Lower Broadway. So typically when we were back in our spaces, I would go for a walk, at the beginning of lunch or whatever, and would look at some of the smaller convenience stores and always noticed how many advertisements for Newport cigarettes there were. And it's very, like, I used to live on Powder House Boulevard in West Somerville, and walking around that neighborhood and seeing the convenience stores and noticing that wasn't the same type of advertisement. You know what I mean? So when you really think of just the level of targeted marketing, and Bonnie and I have discussed this around like the LGBTQ community, and just really, it's one of those things, like once you have that as a lens, you just can see that everywhere you go. And it's so interesting to me. I'll sometimes go to the convenience store that's like 2 blocks from my office, near like the East Somerville Library. And when I walk there, it's a lot of, they have an entrance, but they have multiple, like kind of like storefront, all glass. And there are advertisements that clearly have been up there for 10 years. Like I feel like they just pile things over it, and you can see the fame lines in the window. But it's so interesting because there are advertisements in Spanish, and then there are, it's a lot of what almost becomes, I feel like, a standard. Like you see, some of them are so old that it says like food stamps accepted or EBT accepted, and then it's immediately like, here are the menthol cigarettes, and it's just it's really interesting to kind of see how that almost inadvertent layering happens sometimes, where store owners are receiving this marketing merchandise, and how they're also choosing to put it up. So it's just really interesting, and I'm really glad to hear that they won't be able to advertise products that they don't sell. So I think seeing that change will be great too, because, you think of how many young people walk past all of these spaces, and it just becomes the normal for you. It's part of the background. It's part of your everyday. So when you start thinking of what messaging could go up there, if there was a way to engage with community businesses about community opportunities or things that could really be resources to the community as opposed to promoting unhealthy behaviors, I think would be a great leverage point.
Right, very, very true. I would also say, just to add to this, I was fascinated by people in Revere. At one point, they sort of had to drop the project because of just some things that were going on in the city, but I hope they take it up again. And I was very fascinated by it. The project was to cut down to maybe a third the advertisements that were in store windows. And this wasn't just advertisements for things like alcohol or cigarettes and gambling, all of that. I wish they would not advertise like that. But just the fact that if people can see into the store more easily, it's a deterrent to crime and to all of the things that we worry about. So yes, I agree with you, Nancy. I was thrilled that was part of the law.
I'm seeing a hand up from Matt.
Well, sorry, I joined so late.
Oh, goodness.
Is it very loud?
No, it's just like very staticky.
Oh.
Sound like a robot.
You sound like a robot, yes. You still sound like a robot.
Yeah, I know.
Try again, Matt.
All right, can you hear me now?
You still sound like a robot. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going on.
I don't know. It's this new
you're
computer.
good. You're good. You're good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. It's
Perfect.
this new computer they gave me. I'm still trying to figure it out.
Okay.
I've been using Zoom on my phone for a long time, so this is the first time I'm actually able to do it. I'm very excited. I find that Bonnie and I must talk too much because she just stole my point.
I was gonna say she sounds so much like what we've talked about.
You stole my point in regards to the exposure in the community. Prior to COVID, that was actually something that I was taking a look at as well, in terms of limiting some of the storefront signage. And there's some precedence for this in California, I believe, where they have limited it to like 10 or 15% of the window can be covered by advertisements. Their law regulation came out of the looting back in the 90s, and that for police officers to know kind of what was going on and, you know, safety, kind of what Bonnie said. But I think it is something that we can take a look at, and I want to take a look at again when things get to normal at some point, whenever that may be, to limit that access and, I mean, exposure, because I think all too often people focus on one more than the other, and the two of them together are really the crux of what we need to be looking at. And kind of what Nancy was saying, I guess you guys just either talk to me too much or like you just know all these things, because these are all the points.
We're all great minds think alike, Matt. Great minds think alike.
Probably that's it.
Yeah.
The other thing that you look at it with the advertising is, you know, there's incentives for these, you know, stores to hang up signs, because sometimes that means you get a brand new sign in front of your store. You know, it says, you know, say it's Matt's convenience store, but then there's a huge Bud Light thing on top because Bud Light paid for it because they get the free advertisement all the time. And so it's those type of things that I think people don't very much think about, because it's like, oh, I'm getting a free sign out of this. It is what it is. But, you know, there's a lot of other layers to it that I think we need to consider. So I wanted to jump in to say that. But good job, guys.
Thank you. And then just to wrap everything up nicely for a neat little bow, I do have a couple of resources here. I will probably be adding to this. The National Center for Disease Control and SAMHSA have some great information on their websites. The SAMHSA also has a wonderful 24/7 hotline that people can call for more information. The Mass Department of Public Health has a hotline as well as a website. And then the things that we've been trying to promote with our youth really is the This Is Quitting and the My Life, My Quit apps, which are free to download on your phone. And that will automatically get you connected to not just like a lot of really helpful and useful information, but it's also a great way for youth to get confidential and free nicotine cessation counseling from someone, should it get to that point. I think a lot of people are also getting just kind of like inspirational, like stay sober, stay away from vaping quotes throughout the day. So it's kind of like half social media-esque, and then the other half like very much like public healthcare information and prevention. So I know that a bunch of our youth within SCAP have tried downloading it just to kind of see, you know, if it was something that, you know, they felt would appeal to a youth-based audience. They seem to really like it. So hopefully other organizations will also follow suit. And again, I think the more time that passes, the more resources we're going to see around vaping cessation. But we're still in kind of early days yet in terms of even like acknowledging it as a public health crisis, especially in the face of the other public health crisis that we are all currently dealing with. So we will continue to obviously post more resources up on our social media as soon as we have access to them, which leads me to the shameless plug. Please follow us on our social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, maybe not Twitter because that's not, we don't have a password for that right now, but definitely Instagram and Facebook. We are very, very active, so please follow us there. I will have all of that listed at the very last slide of this. This is normally the point where we would do Q&A. I don't know if anyone has any Q&A that they would like to put on me at the moment. No? Okay. Well, here's also the survey. You know, we are always looking for feedback. So if you would like to, please just copy down that bit.ly link, and it is like a literally 30-second, 60-second survey, or you could take longer if you want. We always love hearing tremendous amounts of feedback from the community. Please feel free to submit that to us. And we will, you know, do our best to make tweaks and edits based on how people feel this presentation went. Just some references, and also please check us out on social media and also our somervillema.gov website for more information. And we're done.
Thank you,
Thank
Kara.
you so much for being here.
There's one thing I'd like to add before